Okay. Right, so my question was, after working in a co-working space for a few months with all the free beer and pizza, has the glamour worn off yet? Well, as I was saying, I've discovered a few pros and cons along the way. So first for the pros. Firstly, there's the separation point. I go into the office whenever I'm not interpreting. And I make a point of never working at home unless it's absolutely necessary. After some time, it really did begin to mean that my home was more relaxing for me. I enjoy having a greater distance between my home and my office. And I'm not alone. According to a survey posted on officevibe.com, 60% of co-workers also report feeling more relaxed at home. Also, it somehow makes me feel more professional. If I think to myself, today I'm going to the office, it increases my sense of purpose for the day, rather than just rolling out of bed and translating in my pyjamas. Besides, I really like being able to put an office address on my invoices. I mean, yes, a client will hardly ever know whether the details you give them are personal or professional. But the point is that it affects my own mentality and how I approach my business. So I feel that it enhances my sense of professionalism. This is actually highlighted in the Harvard Business Review. They report that this aspect tends to make work more meaningful for freelancers, and it affords greater job control. It states that while co-workers do value autonomy, too much autonomy can cripple productivity due to the lack of routine. This means that a limited structure can give an optimal degree of control for independent workers. And so for many of us, going to a different physical space provides just that. Secondly, I have actual work friends. I mean, who knew that talking about the weather and Denise from marketing, sister's husband's cousin's baby could actually be enjoyable sometimes? But I mean, seriously, you do get to know all kinds of interesting people, and a co-working space attracts a very diverse range of people. My one is very focused on freelancers, entrepreneurs and startups. This means that you're constantly around people who may do very different things, but are very like-minded. And what that means is that even if you don't always understand what the person next to you is doing, there's this real sense of camaraderie and respect for your fellow co-workers and what they're trying to achieve. This sense of community is so important, especially for professions where things can get a little solitary. I mean, think back to when you last spent days preparing a glossary or sweating over some legal translation. Antonio Marinos, who's head of marketing at Grind, another co-working space in the States, he claims that when it comes to cultivating a community, workspaces really focus on the human element, and they consider themselves as much a hospitality company as a workspace provider. He says that their staff knows all the members by name and by profession, and they're constantly facilitating introductions between members. I'd say the same applies at work life, and even if you're more than an introvert, this still has benefits. OfficeVibe.com says that 91% of co-workers have better interactions with people once they begin co-working. And 90% of co-workers also feel more confident. Thirdly, more than having friends, a co-working space is amazing for networking. Free beer and pizza might sound marvellous per se, but actually behind it lies a greater logic, which is greater than the joys of fueling up on carbs, as great as that may be. At 5 p.m, on a Thursday, people from various professions with different backgrounds leave their laptops and gather around for a chat. And maybe you only chat about the merits of pepperoni over anchovies. Maybe the conversation doesn't end with a handshake and the exchange of business cards. But nonetheless, I would argue that this still counts as networking in a more subtle form. It's a weekly opportunity to develop a relationship. The informality of it removes the pressure to perform. The lack of hard selling makes people more relaxed and, I dare say, more engaged and willing to listen. So aside from developing friendships, you can actually weave a useful and diverse professional network. And perhaps 3 weeks or even 3 months in, maybe you're having a really slow period and you're feeling a bit anxious about it. And maybe Matt, who sits across you and specialises in marketing for freelancers, is happy to share a few tips to give you some direction. Or maybe you're stuck translating a really, really tricky contract. And Georg, who you enjoy gossiping with from time to time, is actually a lawyer and doesn't have a problem helping you for 20 minutes with your terminology questions. Or maybe, if you're really, really lucky, you've got Tian, who recently started a social media business, and maybe she's looking to go multilingual, and boom, you've got a new direct client. Now, where there are advantages, there are of course disadvantages. When I started this speech, I mentioned a whole load of cons related to poor Jose working away from home. I talked about the commute and having to adhere to a dress code, not having flexible hours, and being constantly surrounded by social interference. But the difference is that these are related to working in an office as an employee rather than in a co-working space where you can come and go as you please. I would say that the only common disadvantage here is probably the commute. Sometimes on a really stressful day, that extra travel time can be a bit inconvenient. Although, of course, no one's forcing you to go into the office on those days, and a strong factor in choosing your co-working space is usually the location. So, unlike when you're an employee, you still have that flexibility to have an office closer to home. Otherwise, in a co-working space, you are less constrained. If you feel like having a track pant day or going to the office, take your shoes off and work curled up on a sofa, or even have a nap there, no one's going to judge you. If you want to come in at 3 p.m. because you were waiting for a delivery, or simply because you couldn't be bothered, your decision is respected. And if you don't feel like cooing over the receptionist's cousin's uncle's dog, then you can just plug in your headphones or sit in a quiet corner and no one will question you. I would say that the main inconvenience is the price. In the English language, we have this expression that says, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Well, I would say that there's no such thing as free beer and pizza either. While we freelancers often talk about the joys of not being bound to an office, we sometimes forget that those employees we pity, the fact that they've got free access to office facilities can be a privilege. But for me, this privilege comes with a pretty hefty price tag that seems more than a little painful at times. Also, because I'm out of the house more and probably a bit lazy, I end up buying lunch way more often than I should, instead of being really organised and bringing a packed lunch from home. So in conclusion, is it worth it? Well, it's a tough call, but I had a look at the figures. And if I compared the months that I've been co-working in the years 2016 and 2017, so that's October to June, to the same period in 2015 and 2016, then I noted a 35% increase in revenue. Now, if you factor in the loss due to the additional expense of a monthly co-working fee, that's still a 30% increase. Then if you want to be really precise, you can factor in the time you spend commuting as a loss as well. So to do that, I factored in 1 hour a day, 5 days a week, 4 weeks a month. I figured the discrepancy would account for the random times when the journey took longer, or times when I didn't go into the office because I'm at an interpreting assignment. This drops me down to 27%. So that's a 27% increase in income, which is 8% less than where I started. Still, 27%. It's a pretty respectable hike. And I'm not alone. Office Vibe states that 50% of co-workers also report an increase in earnings. So to play devil's advocate, you might argue that at this stage in my career, when I'm progressing year on year, working hard on business development and learning to work better and smarter all the time, you could argue that I would have experienced this increase regardless. So maybe, if I'd continued to work from home, I could have banked that extra 8%. And you know what? I will never know. But what I can tell you is that it's hard to put a price on happiness. The Harvard Business Review states that researchers have discovered that co-workers report levels of thriving of about 6 on a 7-point scale. That's at least 1 point higher than the average for employees who do their work in regular jobs. It may sound cliche, but I'm genuinely happy to go to my co-working space every day. It might be where I work, but it's fun, buzzing, soothing environment where I'm surrounded by people I actually like. And 8% or no 8%, the figures certainly don't show that I'm making a loss. And what can I say? It's cheaper than therapy. And if it takes me one step away from becoming a crazy cat lady, then I'd say that I've got a pretty good thing going.